Blood pounded in Cheyenne's ears as she burst through the heavy glass doors of the 42nd Precinct. Her 7-year-old son was gone, stolen in the blink of an eye. But instead of immediate, urgent help, she found the cold, contemptuous sneer of Officer Dalen Miller, a man who saw her skin color before he saw her panic. He thought she was just another neighborhood statistic. He thought he could casually dismiss her. He had absolutely no idea his commanding officer was about to walk through that very door. The suffocating July heat radiated off the cracked pavement of West 4th Street, blurring the streetlights into hazy, golden halos. Cheyenne Jackson leaned her head against the steering wheel of her 10-year-old Honda Civic, taking a deep, shuddering breath. It had been a brutal 14-hour shift in the pediatric ward at St. Jude's Medical Center. Her light blue scrubs were stained with God knew what, her feet throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and her curly hair was haphazardly tied into a messy bun that was slowly unraveling. But the exhaustion began to melt away the second she glanced in the rearview mirror. Strapped securely in the back seat, fast asleep with his cheek pressed against the window, was 7-year-old Leo. He was clutching a battered action figure to his chest, his breathing slow and steady. He was her entire world, the sole reason she worked double shifts, the reason she tolerated the endless disrespect from hospital administrators, and the reason she kept pushing forward after her husband had passed away 3 years prior. The dashboard clock glowed bright green. 9:14 p.m. The Civic's air conditioning had given out 2 weeks ago, and the stifling air inside the cabin was becoming unbearable. Cheyenne pulled into the brightly lit parking lot of a corner convenience store, the neon open sign flickering with a faint electrical buzz. Just a quick stop, she whispered to herself. She needed a bottle of cold water and maybe a sugary iced tea to keep her awake for the remaining 20-minute drive to their small apartment. She looked back at Leo. He was deeply under. The store was small, consisting of floor-to-ceiling glass windows. She could park right in front of the door, leave the engine running so the faint fan could at least circulate some air, and be in and out in less than 60 seconds. She wouldn't even lose sight of the car. It was a calculated risk, one made out of sheer exhaustion and a mother's desire not to wake her exhausted child. Cheyenne threw the car into park, leaving the keys in the ignition, and stepped out into the muggy night air. The bell above the convenience store door jingled cheerily as she walked in. She kept her eyes locked on the silver Honda, just 10 feet away through the glass. She walked backward toward the refrigerated section, her eyes never leaving the vehicle. She grabbed a cold bottle of water, the condensation instantly wetting her palm, and turned around for exactly 3 seconds to place a $5 bill on the counter. "Keep the change, Jerry," she said to the familiar clerk. "Long night, Cheyenne?" Jerry asked, slowly counting the coins. "You have no idea," she replied, turning back toward the window. The spot where her car had been parked was empty. Cheyenne blinked, a wave of cold confusion washing over her brain. It was as if reality had abruptly short-circuited. She took a step toward the glass, her heart performing a strange, violent stutter in her chest. "Wait," she breathed. Then she heard it, the aggressive high-pitched screech of tires tearing against asphalt. She threw her weight against the glass door, bursting out onto the sidewalk just in time to see the tail lights of her silver Honda taking a sharp, violent left turn at the intersection of 4th and Elm, running a red light and disappearing into the dense urban sprawl. "Leo!" Cheyenne screamed, the sound tearing from her throat with a primal, agonizing force. "Leo, my baby!" The water bottle slipped from her fingers, shattering against the concrete. water pooling around her worn sneakers. She sprinted toward the street, her legs moving faster than they ever had, her lungs burning with the humid air. She ran until her chest felt like it was going to cave in, stopping in the middle of the intersection, spinning around wildly. The street was empty. The city noise continued, a distant siren, a dog barking, the low hum of traffic, completely indifferent to the fact that her universe had just been violently ripped apart. Jerry rushed out of the store, his phone already pressed to his ear. "Cheyenne, I'm calling 911. They said all units are busy on the east side with a warehouse fire. It might be 10 minutes. 10 minutes! Cheyenne shrieked, her voice cracking, hysteria clawing at the edges of her sanity. He's in the car. My son is in the back seat. They took my son. She couldn't wait 10 minutes. 10 minutes was an eternity. 10 minutes meant crossing state lines, meant disappearing into chop shops, meant losing Leo forever. "The precinct," Cheyenne gasped, wildly pointing down the block. "The 42nd precinct is just 2 streets down. I'm going there. Tell them I'm going there." Without waiting for a response, Cheyenne took off sprinting down the sidewalk. Her scrubs clung to her sweating skin, tears blurring her vision, mixing with the sweat stinging her eyes. She tripped over a raised piece of concrete, scraping her knees hard against the pavement, tearing the fabric of her pants and drawing blood. She didn't feel the pain. Adrenaline, fueled by a mother's absolute, terrifying desperation, masked everything else. She scrambled back to her feet, chanting her son's name under her breath like a desperate prayer. She rounded the final corner, the glowing blue lamps of the police precinct coming into view like a beacon of hope in the dark. She threw her entire body weight against the heavy wooden double doors, practically falling into the brightly lit, sterile lobby. The lobby of the 42nd precinct smelled intensely of industrial bleach and stale, burnt coffee. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with an irritating, relentless hum. To Cheyenne, gasping for air, bleeding from her knees and trembling with shock, the room felt like a freezing vacuum. Behind the thick, bulletproof glass of the front desk sat Officer Dalen Miller. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, his uniform pressed to a sharp, military crispness that contrasted sharply with his relaxed, utterly bored posture. He was leaning back in his swiveled chair, a steaming styrofoam cup of coffee in one hand, aggressively scrolling through his personal cell phone with the other. A toothpick jutted lazily from the corner of his mouth. Cheyenne rushed the desk, her hands slapping against the thick acrylic glass, leaving sweaty palm prints. "Help me, please, you have to help me," she gasped, her voice hoarse and broken. "My car, my son, he was taken. Someone stole my car with my son inside." Officer Miller didn't flinch. He didn't drop his phone. He didn't sit up straight. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he moved his eyes from his glowing screen to look at the frantic black woman standing on the other side of the glass. His gaze dragged up and down her frame, taking in her disheveled, messy hair, her stained blue scrubs, the blood trickling down her shin, and the wild, uncontrolled panic in her eyes. A subtle micro-expression of disdain flickered across Miller's face. It was a look Cheyenne had seen before in department stores, in banks, in the waiting rooms of elite schools. It was the look of immediate, unwarranted judgment. Miller took a slow sip of his coffee, set the cup down, and casually tapped a button to activate the two-way intercom. "Lower your voice, ma'am," Miller said, his tone dripping with condescension. The speaker crackled, projecting his slow, drawling voice into the lobby. "This is a police station, not a public park. Stop pounding on the glass." "Did you hear me?" Cheyenne cried, pressing her face closer to the speaker grate. My car was just stolen from St. Jude Street. My 7-year-old boy, Leo, is in the back seat. You need to put out an Amber Alert. You need to radio the patrol cars. It just happened 3 minutes ago. They went north on Elm." Miller sighed, an exaggerated puff of air that conveyed his profound annoyance at having to do his job. He finally put his phone face down on the desk and pulled a blank incident report form toward him. He clicked his pen with maddening sluggishness. "All right, calm down. Hysterics aren't going to get your car back faster," Miller said, his eyes locking onto hers with a chilling lack of empathy. "Name?"
"Cheyenne Jackson,"
she choked out, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, officer, every second—" "I ask the questions, Ms. Jackson," Miller interrupted sharply. "Address?" Cheyenne rattled off her address, her hands shaking so violently she had to grip the metal counter to steady herself. "And the boy's father?" Miller asked, his pen pausing over the paper. He looked up, his eyes narrowing with a presumptive sneer. "Does he live at this address? Do you have full custody?" Cheyenne froze, the implication hitting her like a physical blow to the chest. "What?" "No, my husband passed away 3 years ago. What does that have to do with anything? A stranger took my car." "Uh-huh," Miller said, clearly unconvinced, jotting something down. "Listen, Ms. Jackson, 9 times out of 10, these kidnappings are just baby daddy disputes. You sure you didn't have an argument with an ex-boyfriend? Someone who felt they had a right to the car or the kid?" "There is no ex-boyfriend," Cheyenne screamed, her fear morphing into a blinding, white-hot rage. "A stranger jumped into my car at the convenience store and drove off. Why aren't you on the radio? Put out a description. It's a silver Honda Civic, license plate JKL 892. He's in danger." Miller stopped writing and leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together over his stomach. He looked at Cheyenne with a terrifyingly calm, deeply arrogant expression. "Let me get this straight," Miller drawled, his voice echoing through the intercom. "You left a 7-year-old child unattended in a running vehicle in the middle of the night in this neighborhood." He clicked his tongue, shaking his head in mock pity. "Well, Ms. Jackson, that sounds like a severe case of child endangerment to me. Maybe if you were a more responsible parent, you wouldn't be standing in my lobby crying." Cheyenne felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The maliciousness of his words, the casual cruelty of his assumption, paralyzed her for a fraction of a second. He was weaponizing her one mistake, a desperate, exhausted mistake, to justify his complete inaction. He was punishing her. He looked at her and saw a stereotype, a negligent mother who deserved whatever tragedy was currently unfolding. "I was 10 feet away," Cheyenne sobbed, slamming her fist against the counter, no longer caring about the rules. "I was getting him water. Please, I am begging you on my knees. Call it in. Please. He's just a little boy. He's wearing a red Spider-Man shirt." "I'll file the report, Ms. Jackson," Miller said coldly, picking up his coffee again. "But we have protocols. We don't just blast Amber Alerts because a mother made a bad choice and lost track of her vehicle. We have to investigate first. Make sure you aren't lying to cover up a custody violation. People from your demographic have a habit of coming in here expecting miracles to fix their own negligent mistakes." The veiled racism, the blatant profiling, hung in the sterile air of the lobby like toxic gas. He hadn't used a slur, but the hatred in his eyes, the absolute refusal to see her humanity, was deafening. He didn't care about Leo. He was actively deciding to let the clock run out on her child's life just to teach her a twisted lesson in authority. The large analog clock on the wall behind Miller's head ticked with a loud metallic clack. 9:22 p.m. 8 minutes had passed since her car was taken. 8 minutes at 60 miles an hour. Whoever took her car could be halfway across the county by now. They could have realized there was a child in the back and panicked. They could have pulled over in a dark alley. The horrific scenarios flashing through Cheyenne's mind threatened to send her into cardiovascular collapse. "I want to speak to a detective," Cheyenne demanded, her voice dropping an octave, the tears drying on her face, replaced by a fierce maternal ferocity. "I want to speak to your superior officer. Now!" Officer Miller's smirk vanished, replaced by a hard, dangerous scowl. He hated having his authority challenged, especially by someone he deemed inherently beneath him. "There are no detectives available for a stolen property dispute," Miller snapped. "And my commanding officer is busy doing actual police work. You need to sit down in those chairs, keep your mouth shut, and wait until I finish typing this report into the system. If you keep raising your voice at me, I will have you arrested for disturbing the peace and creating a public nuisance. Do you understand me?" "Arrest me!" Cheyenne screamed, her hands gripping her hair. "My son is missing. Radio the car. Just pick up the radio and give them the plate number. It takes 5 seconds. "One more word," Miller growled, standing up from his chair. He unclipped the radio from his belt, but he didn't raise it to his mouth. Instead, he placed his hand firmly on the handle of his service weapon, a universal intimidation tactic meant to silence civilians. "One more word, and I'm putting you in a holding cell, and then child services will be the ones looking for your kid, not us." Cheyenne stared at the man through the thick glass. She felt entirely powerless. The system, the very institution designed to protect her and her son, was being guarded by a gatekeeper who actively despised her existence. She was losing time. Leo was out there in the dark, crying for her, wondering why his mother wasn't coming to save him. Think, Cheyenne. Think. Her mind raced back over the last month. She remembered a night at the hospital 3 weeks ago. A horrific multi-car pileup on Interstate 95. The emergency room had been a war zone. She had spent 6 hours stabilizing a 12-year-old girl with a ruptured spleen and severe internal bleeding. She had held the girl's hand, monitored her vitals, and kept her alive until the surgical team was ready. After the surgery, a man in a rumpled suit had found Cheyenne in the break room. He had been crying. He was the girl's father. He had held Cheyenne's hands, looking her dead in the eye, and handed her a thick, embossed business card. "You saved my little girl," the man had said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't leave her side. I owe you a debt I can never repay. If you ever, and I mean ever, need anything in this city, you call this number." Cheyenne frantically patted down her scrub pockets. Her heart plummeted as she realized she didn't have her purse. It was in the stolen car. But then her fingers brushed against something stiff in the breast pocket of her scrub top. It was her ID badge holder. Tucked behind her St. Jude's identification card was the business card. She had kept it there for emergencies, though she never imagined she would actually use it. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. The gold foil lettering caught the harsh fluorescent light of the lobby. Captain Robert Hayes, Commanding Officer, 42nd Precinct. "I'm not sitting down," Cheyenne said, her voice shaking but laced with a terrifying new resolve. She held the card up to the glass, pressing the gold lettering against the acrylic so Miller could read it. "I want Captain Hayes. I know he is in this building. Get him out here, right now." Miller squinted at the card through the glass. For a fraction of a second, surprise registered on his face. But his arrogance quickly swallowed it whole. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Where did you steal that, sweetheart?" Miller scoffed. "You really think a hospital janitor or whatever you are is personal friends with the captain? You think flashing a business card you found in the trash is going to make me jump? The captain doesn't have time for people like you. I am a pediatric nurse, you arrogant piece of trash, Cheyenne snarled, her fist slamming the glass so hard her knuckles bruised. And I am telling you, if anything happens to my son, because you refuse to do your job, Robert Hayes will end your career. Get him. Miller's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. The veins in his thick neck bulged. He had had enough of this insubordinate woman. He slammed his hand down on the electronic door release. A loud buzz echoed through the room as the heavy security door connecting the lobby to the inner bullpen unlocked. "That's it," Miller spat, stepping out from behind the protective glass, aggressively pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his tactical belt. "You're done. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for threatening a police officer and disorderly conduct." Cheyenne didn't back down. She stood her ground, her chest heaving, the business card crushed in her fist. "Don't you dare touch me! My son is out there! Turn around!" Miller roared, lunging forward, his large hand reaching out to roughly grab her shoulder. "What the hell is going on out here, Miller?" The voice boomed through the lobby like a crack of thunder, instantly freezing the air in the room. It was deep, authoritative, and laced with absolute fury. Miller stopped dead in his tracks, his hand inches from Cheyenne's shoulder. He spun around, the color instantly draining from his flushed face. Standing in the doorway to the bullpen, holding a stack of files, was Captain Robert Hayes. He was a tall, imposing man, with silver hair at his temples and piercing blue eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He wore a crisp white shirt with gold stars on the collar, his presence commanding immediate and unquestionable respect. Hayes's eyes darted from the drawn handcuffs in Miller's hands to the terrified, bleeding woman standing in the center of the lobby. His brow furrowed in confusion and anger. But as his eyes locked onto Cheyenne's face, taking in her stained scrubs and terrified expression, the captain's face underwent a dramatic transformation. The anger vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. "Cheyenne," Captain Hayes whispered, dropping the files. They scattered across the linoleum floor, completely ignored. Officer Miller looked back and forth between his furious commanding officer and the frantic black woman he had just tried to arrest. His stomach plummeted as a cold sweat broke out across his neck. "Captain," Miller stammered, his voice suddenly weak and high-pitched. "This woman she was causing a disturbance. She was hysterical. I was just trying to control the situation." "Shut your mouth, Miller," Captain Hayes snapped, his voice dangerously low. He didn't even look at the officer. He stepped right past him, closing the distance to Cheyenne in 2 large strides. He gently placed his hands on her trembling shoulders. "Cheyenne, my God, you're bleeding," Hayes said, his voice softening entirely, filled with an urgent, familial concern. "What happened? What are you doing here?" Cheyenne's tough exterior finally broke. The relief of seeing a friendly face, someone with the power to help, shattered her remaining composure. She collapsed forward against the captain's chest, sobbing violently. "It's Leo, Robert," Cheyenne wailed, clinging to his shirt. "Someone stole my car. They took my baby. He's in the car. It's been 12 minutes and this officer, he wouldn't call it in. He wouldn't help me. He was going to arrest me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Captain Hayes gently pulled back from Cheyenne, looking her in the eyes. "Your car was stolen with Leo inside? 12 minutes ago?" Cheyenne nodded frantically. "Silver Honda, JKL-892, headed north on Elm." Captain Hayes turned his head slowly. The look he gave Officer Dalen Miller was not just angry. It was lethal. It was the look of a man who was about to completely dismantle someone's life. Miller, Hayes said, his voice eerily calm, a terrifying contrast to the storm brewing in his eyes. Tell me you put out a county-wide Amber Alert. Tell me you radioed every single unit in a 10-mile radius. Miller swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He took a step back, the handcuffs dangling uselessly from his fingers. Sir, I was just following protocol. She left the child unattended in a running vehicle. I had to investigate if it was a custody dispute before causing a city-wide panic. You know how these people— These people! Hayes roared, the volume shaking the glass in the front doors. She is the nurse who saved my daughter's life last month. She sat with Sarah for 6 hours while she bled internally. And you stood here and did nothing while her child was kidnapped. Miller looked like he was going to vomit. Captain, I didn't know. Dispatch! Hayes bellowed, turning his back on Miller and grabbing the microphone attached to his shoulder. This is Captain Hayes. Priority 1. Code 32. We have an active kidnapping. Suspect vehicle is a silver Honda Civic. Plate Juliet Kilo Lima 892. Last seen heading north on Elm from West 4th. Child in the back seat, 7-year-old boy named Leo. I want every available unit, every detective, every chopper in the sky looking for this vehicle. Shut down the highway ramps. Now! The radio crackled instantly with a flurry of affirmative responses. The entire precinct suddenly came alive with the blare of sirens echoing from the parking lot. Hayes turned back to Cheyenne, his face grim but resolute. We are going to find him, Cheyenne. I swear to you, we are going to find him. He then slowly turned back to Miller, who was shaking visibly. As for you, Hayes whispered, stepping so close to Miller that the officer had to lean back. Give me your badge. Give me your gun. You are stripped of your duties effective immediately. Captain. Please, Miller begged, his arrogance entirely evaporated. It was a mistake. I was just— You let your prejudice dictate the life of a child, Hayes interrupted, his voice dripping with disgust. If that boy is hurt because you delayed this response by 12 minutes, I won't just fire you, Miller. I will personally see to it that you spend the rest of your life in a concrete cell. Now get out of my sight before I throw you in holding myself. The atmosphere inside the 42nd Precinct transformed from a stagnant bureaucratic purgatory into a high-octane war room in a matter of seconds. Captain Robert Hayes did not just issue orders, he weaponized the entire police force. He guided Cheyenne with a firm, reassuring hand through the heavy security doors, past the bewildered officers in the bullpen, and straight into the precinct's dispatch and communications center. The room was bathed in the cool blue glow of a dozen massive monitors. Dispatchers with headsets barked codes and street names, their fingers flying across illuminated keyboards. The air hummed with the electric tension of a manhunt. Hayes pulled a rolling chair over for Cheyenne, forcing her to sit before her trembling legs finally gave out. Get her a blanket and a first aid kit for those knees, Hayes snapped at a passing deputy, his eyes never leaving the central tactical screen, displaying a digital map of the city. Blinking red and blue dots represented patrol cars swarming the grid like angry hornets. Captain, the lead dispatcher, a seasoned woman named Brenda, called out without turning around. Amber Alert is live on all highway signs, local broadcasts and cell networks. We have state troopers locking down Interstates 95 and 295. Nothing gets out of the county without us scanning the plates. Cheyenne sat shivering under the thin wool blanket a deputy had draped over her shoulders, the iodine stinging the scraped flesh of her knees. The physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological torture of the ticking clock. It had been 22 minutes since the Honda was taken. 22 minutes of a stranger having complete control over her little boy.
If they just wanted a joyride,
Cheyenne whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaotic radio chatter. They wouldn't hurt him, right? They'd just leave the car somewhere. Hayes knelt beside her, leveling his gaze with hers. The hard edge he had shown Miller was entirely gone, replaced by the deep empathy of a fellow parent. Car thieves are looking for a quick buck, Cheyenne. They want a vehicle they can strip for parts or use in a robbery. The last thing a petty criminal wants is a kidnapping charge. That's federal time. The second this guy realizes there's a 7-year-old in the back seat, he's going to panic. He's going to ditch the car.
But where?
Cheyenne choked back a sob.
Where would he leave him? It's so dark out there.
That's what we're finding out right now, Hayes assured her. He stood up and projected his voice across the room. I want traffic cam footage from the intersection of Elm and 9th. That's the only straight shot out of the neighborhood without hitting the downtown gridlock. Pull it up now. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the immediate area of the room as a technician frantically typed. On the largest monitor, a grainy black-and-white video feed flickered to life. It showed the 4-way intersection at Elm and 9th. The timestamp in the corner read 9:18 p.m. Fast forward, Hayes ordered. The cars on the screen zipped by in a fast-paced blur until the technician slammed the spacebar. Got it, the tech said, zooming in on a silver vehicle blowing through a red light at breakneck speed. Cheyenne gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It was her car. The dent on the rear bumper from a grocery store parking lot mishap 2 years ago was clearly visible. But what made her heart stop completely was the faint silhouette in the back window. A small shape. Leo. He's heading east, Hayes analyzed, his brow furrowing deep in thought. East on 9th leads straight into the industrial sector. The old rail yards, the abandoned textile mills. It's a dead zone. No traffic. No witnesses. He's looking for a place to hide, Brenda chimed in, her fingers already dancing across her keyboard. I'm redirecting all units from the west side to the industrial park. Suddenly, the police scanner on the main console erupted with a burst of static, followed by the frantic voice of a patrol officer. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I am currently westbound on Industrial Boulevard, near the old ironworks facility. I have fresh tire tracks skidding off the main road into the gravel lot of Warehouse Sector 4. The chain-link fence has been rammed open. Hayes lunged for the microphone on Brenda's desk. Unit 7, this is Captain Hayes. Do you have eyes on the vehicle? Negative, Captain, the radio crackled. It's pitch black back here, and these warehouses are massive. I'm requesting backup and floodlights before I proceed on foot. If the suspect is armed and cornered, I don't want to walk into an ambush. Do not engage alone, Hayes ordered, his voice tight. Set up a perimeter. I am on my way. Hayes dropped the microphone and turned to grab his tactical vest from a coat rack near the door. I'm coming with you, Cheyenne said, throwing the blanket off and standing up. Her legs were unsteady, but her posture was rigid with a mother's defiance. Cheyenne, no, Hayes said gently, strapping the thick Kevlar over his chest. It's an active tactical scene. You need to stay here where it's safe. We will bring him back to you. That is my son out there in the dark, Cheyenne yelled, the raw emotion in her voice silencing the entire dispatch center. He is terrified. He is alone, and he doesn't know any of your men. If you corner that guy and my baby is in the crossfire, I need to be there. I am not sitting in this room while you hunt for my child in a junkyard. Take me with you, Robert. Please. Hayes stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Protocol dictated he leave the hysterical civilian behind. But looking into Cheyenne's eyes, he didn't see a hysterical civilian. He saw the same fierce, unyielding woman who had kept his daughter tethered to this earth when the monitors were flatlining. He owed her a debt of blood. "Let's go," Hayes said gruffly. The unmarked black police SUV tore through the city streets, its siren wailing like a banshee, the strobe lights painting the brick storefronts in violent flashes of blue and red. Captain Hayes drove with terrifying precision, taking corners at speeds that made the heavy vehicle groan in protest. Cheyenne sat in the passenger seat, both hands gripping the overhead handle so tightly her knuckles were completely white. The transition from the bustling city to the industrial park was stark and chilling. The streetlights ended abruptly, replaced by towering skeletal structures of rusted steel and broken concrete. The old textile mills and ironworks facilities loomed in the darkness like decaying monuments of a forgotten era. The air here smelled of rust, stagnant water, and old oil. Up ahead, the flashing lights of a dozen police cruisers illuminated a massive, dilapidated warehouse complex. The chain-link fence surrounding the property had been violently torn down, the metal twisted and flattened. Hayes slammed the SUV into park before it had even fully stopped, drawing his service weapon in one fluid motion. "Stay right behind me," Hayes commanded, his voice barely a whisper. "Do not step out from my shadow." Cheyenne nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They moved together past the perimeter of patrol cars. Officers in tactical gear with assault rifles drawn were fanning out, their heavy flashlights cutting thick white cones through the oppressive, muggy darkness. "Over here!" a voice shouted from the far side of the gravel lot. Hayes and Cheyenne broke into a run, navigating over broken pallets and shattered glass. Behind a towering stack of rusted shipping containers, bathed in the harsh glare of a police spotlight, sat the silver Honda Civic. Cheyenne let out a strangled cry and rushed forward, pushing past a startled deputy. "Leo!" she screamed, yanking the back door open. The back seat was empty. The battered Spider-Man action figure lay face down on the floorboard, right next to Leo's left sneaker. Cheyenne collapsed against the side of the car, a sickening wave of vertigo washing over her. "No, no, no, no! Where is he? Where is my baby?" Hayes stepped up, his flashlight sweeping the interior of the car. The keys were still in the ignition. The driver's side door was wide open, the chime dinging softly in the night air. "The suspect abandoned the vehicle," Hayes said, his mind racing, processing the scene with clinical speed. He pointed his flashlight at the dusty ground just outside the driver's door. "Look at the footprints. Heavy boots, running fast toward the main warehouse." He panicked. "But Leo's shoe is here," Cheyenne cried, holding the small, light-up sneaker to her chest. Hayes moved to the rear door and crouched down. He traced his light along the ground. "Small footprints," Hayes murmured, "leading away from the car, but in the opposite direction, toward the shipping containers." A surge of hope, sharp and painful, pierced through Cheyenne's chest. "He ran? My baby ran away from him?" "He's a smart kid," Hayes said, standing up and raising his voice to the surrounding officers. "The suspect and the child went in opposite directions. I want a grid search of this entire yard. Look in every container, every pipe, every shadow. The boy is on foot, missing a shoe." The officers instantly shifted their search patterns, their flashlights bouncing crazily against the corrugated metal walls of the containers. Cheyenne didn't wait for them. Driven by an instinct older than language, she plunged into the maze of shipping containers. It was a terrifying labyrinth of rusted metal and deep, impenetrable shadows. The air was thick and suffocating. "Leo!" Cheyenne called out, her voice echoing off the steel walls. "Leo, it's Mommy! Mommy is here!
You can come out, baby.
Nothing but the sound of police radios crackling in the distance and the crunch of gravel under her own feet.
Leo, please,
she sobbed, stumbling blindly down a narrow alley between two towering red containers.
Spider-Man, where are you?
She used his favorite nickname, a desperate attempt to cut through his fear. If he was hiding, he might be too terrified of the police, of the noise, of the dark, to reveal himself. He had been taught never to talk to strangers. Suddenly, a massive, deafening crash echoed from the main warehouse behind them, followed instantly by the sharp, terrifying crack of a gunshot. Cheyenne froze, her blood turning to ice.
Shots fired! Shots fired in the main building!
A radio blared in the distance. Hayes's voice boomed across the yard.
Hold the perimeter! Medics to the front!
Cheyenne couldn't breathe. Was Leo in there? Had the suspect found him? She spun around, ready to sprint blindly toward the gunfire when she heard it. It was faint, barely louder than a whisper, but to Cheyenne's ears, it was louder than a jet engine. A small, muffled whimper. It came from directly beneath her. She dropped to her knees, tearing at her torn skin on the sharp gravel. Beside her was a massive concrete drainage pipe, half buried in the dirt, covered by an overgrown patch of thorny weeds. She shoved her hands into the brambles, ignoring the sharp thorns tearing into her flesh. She peered into the pitch-black opening of the pipe.
Leo,
she whispered, her voice trembling violently. Two small, terrified eyes caught the faint ambient light from the police strobes, reflecting off the metal containers. A small figure was huddled as far back into the damp, narrow concrete tube as possible, his arms wrapped tightly around his knees. He was missing his left shoe.
Mommy?
A tiny, shaking voice echoed from the darkness.
Oh, thank God,
Cheyenne sobbed, completely breaking down.
Yes, baby. It's Mommy. Come here, sweetheart. Come to Mommy.
Leo crawled forward, his small hands scraping against the rough concrete. As soon as he was within reach, Cheyenne grabbed him, pulling his small, trembling body out of the dirt and burying his face into her neck. She squeezed him so tightly, she feared she might break his ribs, rocking him back and forth on the gravel.
I got you,
she cried, kissing the top of his dusty head repeatedly.
I got you. I got you. I got you.
Captain Hayes rounded the corner, his gun drawn, a flashlight cutting through the dark. When the beam landed on Cheyenne, sitting in the dirt, clutching her child, he immediately lowered his weapon. The heavy tension that had been holding his broad shoulders rigid instantly evaporated. He let out a long, ragged exhale. "We got him," Hayes spoke into his radio, his voice thick with emotion. "Cancel the search. The boy is safe." The piercing wail of a waiting ambulance cut through the heavy, humid air of the industrial yard. Paramedics descended upon Cheyenne and Leo the moment Captain Hayes escorted them out of the maze of shipping containers. Sitting on the bumper of the ambulance, wrapped in a thick thermal blanket, Leo clung to his mother's neck. He was coated in dust and trembling from the cold shock of adrenaline, but miraculously, he was unharmed.
"You did so good, baby,"
Cheyenne whispered, her tears soaking into the fabric of his ruined Spider-Man shirt. "You were so brave. You ran and you hid, just like we talked about." Leo nodded against her shoulder, his small fingers gripping her scrubs with a strength that broke her heart. Captain Hayes stood a few feet away, watching them with a profound sense of relief. But the night was not over. The sharp crack of the gunshot from the main warehouse still echoed in his mind. He turned his attention back to the massive, decaying brick structure. The tactical team had completely surrounded the building, their high-powered floodlights bathing the cracked exterior in blinding white light. His radio buzzed. "Captain, this is Sergeant Collins. We have the suspect in custody. He fired a warning shot at our entry team, but tripped over some rusted machinery trying to flee. He suffered a compound fracture to his right leg. No officers injured. We've secured his weapon and are bringing him out now." "Understood, Collins. Have the second bus prep for transport," Hayes replied, his voice hardening back into the authoritative timbre of a commanding officer. Hayes approached the entrance of the warehouse, just as two heavily armored SWAT officers dragged a thrashing, screaming man out into the floodlights. The suspect was a scrawny, hollow-cheeked man in his late 20s, his clothes stained with grease and his leg bent at a gruesome, unnatural angle. He was clutching a cheap, prepaid cell phone in his hand, like a lifeline. "Get off me! I need a doctor! My leg is broken!" the man shrieked, spitting blood onto the gravel. Hayes stepped into the man's field of vision, towering over him, his face carved from stone. "You're going to get a doctor right after you tell me exactly what you were thinking, stealing a car with a child in the back seat." "I didn't know the kid was in there," the man sobbed, his bravado entirely shattered by the agonizing pain. "I swear to God, it was supposed to be a clean grab, a quick boost for the chop shop. I didn't see the kid until I hit the industrial park and he started screaming. I panicked. I just left the car and ran." Hayes frowned, a cold sense of suspicion creeping up his spine. Something about the man's story, about the sheer desperation in his voice, felt off. "A clean grab? You took a battered 10-year-old Honda Civic from a brightly lit convenience store lot. There were half a dozen luxury cars parked on that same block. Why take the massive risk for a car that's barely worth $1,000 in parts?" The suspect grimaced, groaning in pain as the medics rushed over with a stretcher. He looked up at Hayes, his eyes darting nervously around the yard, terrified of the uniforms surrounding him. "Because it was guaranteed," the man hissed through gritted teeth as they lifted him onto the gurney. "It was guaranteed clear. I got the text." Hayes grabbed the edge of the stretcher, stopping the medics in their tracks. He leaned down, his face inches from the suspect's sweating forehead. "What text? Guaranteed by who?" The man swallowed hard. "The guy who tips us off. The guy on the inside. He sends us plates and locations of easy targets in his sector. People who leave their cars running. People he knows won't get a fast police response. He said the Honda was prime. He said it was a neighborhood local, someone the precinct wouldn't rush to help if they called it in." The air in Hayes's lungs turned to ice. He looked down at the cheap prepaid phone still clutched in the suspect's hand. Without a word, Hayes pried the phone from the man's trembling fingers. He clicked the screen on. It was opened to a text message thread. Sender. Unknown number. Message at 9:10 p.m. Silver Honda Civic. St. Jude's Corner Store. Engine running. Owner is a female local, no heat. Easy grab. You have a 15-minute window before I even log the call. Hayes stared at the screen, the horrific truth settling over him like a suffocating shroud. It wasn't just casual racism. It wasn't just a lazy, prejudiced officer refusing to do his job. It was active, malignant corruption. Officer Dalen Miller was running a car theft ring out of the 42nd Precinct front desk. He was profiling victims, choosing people he deemed unimportant, people whose cries for help he could easily dismiss or delay, and selling them out to local chop shops for a cut of the profit. Miller had delayed Cheyenne's Amber Alert, not just to punish her, but to give this thief enough time to get the stolen car into a garage. Miller had risked the life of a 7-year-old boy to protect a $200 kickback. "Captain?" Sergeant Collins asked, noticing the terrifying, silent rage radiating from Hayes. "Are you all right?" Hayes looked up, his blue eyes blazing with a fury so cold and absolute it made Collins take a step back. "Transport this piece of garbage to the secure ward at County General," Hayes ordered, slipping the burner phone into an evidence bag. "Put a two-man guard on his door. No one goes in or out without my direct authorization." Hayes turned on his heel and strode purposefully toward his black SUV. The rescue mission was over. The hunt for the child was successfully concluded. Now it was time for the cleansing. The lobby of the 42nd Precinct was eerily quiet when Captain Hayes walked back through the heavy glass doors. It was past midnight. The frenetic energy of the search had dissolved into the low, administrative hum of the night shift. Officer Dalen Miller was sitting exactly where Hayes had left him, though he was no longer behind the protective glass of the front desk. He was slumped in a hard plastic chair in the corner of the bullpen, his badge and service weapon resting on the commanding officer's desk. He looked pale, nervous, and pathetic. He thought he was facing a suspension. He thought he was facing an internal affairs review for insubordination and dereliction of duty. He believed his union rep could spin the delay as a misunderstanding of protocol. He had no idea his entire world was about to be obliterated. Hayes walked into the bullpen, the heavy security door slamming shut behind him with a resonant, final thud. Every head in the room turned. The sheer, terrifying aura projecting from the captain caused 3 deputies to immediately stand up from their desks. Miller scrambled to his feet, trying to muster a look of contrition. "Captain Hayes, sir. I've been sitting here thinking about what happened, and I realize my behavior was out of line. I misjudged the situation with the mother. I'm willing to take the suspension and write a formal apology to—" "Put your hands behind your back, Dalen," Hayes interrupted, his voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register that sent a shiver through the entire room. Miller froze, a nervous, confused smile twitching on his lips. "Sir, you already took my badge and gun. I'm off duty." "You are under arrest," Hayes said, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Arrest?" Miller scoffed, his voice rising in Titanic. "For what? Being slow on a dispatch? You can't arrest me for a policy violation, Robert. I want my union rep." Hayes closed the distance between them, grabbing Miller by the collar of his crisp uniform shirt and slamming him hard against the concrete wall of the bullpen. The thud echoed through the silent room. "I am arresting you for conspiracy to commit grand theft auto," Hayes snarled, pressing his forearm against Miller's chest, pinning him in place. "I am arresting you for extortion, official misconduct, and being an accessory after the fact to the kidnapping of a minor." All the color drained from Miller's face. His eyes bulged in pure, unadulterated terror. "What? No. No, you don't understand. I have the burner phone, Dalen," Hayes whispered, dangerously close to Miller's ear. "I have the texts. I have the thief in custody, singing like a canary about the cop on the inside who tips them off to easy targets. You profiled that mother. You looked at a hard-working nurse, saw the color of her skin, saw her exhaustion, and decided she was a victim no one would care about. You used your badge to shield a criminal enterprise, and in doing so you almost got a 7-year-old boy killed." Miller began to hyperventilate, tears welling in his eyes as the reality of his situation crashed down upon him. The arrogant, untouchable gatekeeper was gone, replaced by a coward facing decades in a federal penitentiary. "Please," Miller begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob. "I didn't know the kid was in the car. If I had known the kid was in the car, I never would have sent the text. You have to believe me." "You didn't care to look," Hayes said disgustedly. He yanked Miller's arms roughly behind his back, the heavy steel cuffs ratcheting tightly over his wrists with a loud, satisfying click. You didn't care about anything but your own prejudice and your own greed. You are a disgrace to this uniform, to this precinct, and to the city. Hayes shoved Miller toward two waiting deputies. Process him. Put him in a solitary holding cell. I don't want him speaking to anyone but his lawyer. And call the FBI field office. We have a corrupt officer running an interstate chop shop ring. We're going to tear his life apart. As the deputies dragged a weeping, broken Dalen Miller away, Hayes took a deep, shuddering breath, the tension slowly draining from his shoulders. He looked around the bullpen. The remaining officers were staring at him in stunned silence. Let this be a lesson to every single person in this room, Hayes announced, his voice ringing with absolute moral authority. When a citizen walks through those doors begging for help, you do not judge them. You do not profile them. You serve them. Because if I ever catch a hint of what this coward did in my precinct again, I will personally ensure you never see the light of day. 2 days later, the morning sun poured through the windows of a bright, cheerful hospital room at St. Jude's Medical Center. Cheyenne sat in a plush armchair, sipping a cup of actual hot coffee. Beside her, tucked into a hospital bed, Leo was watching cartoons on a tablet, surrounded by a mountain of new action figures and balloons. He was being kept for observation, purely as a precaution, but his smile was radiant, and his laughter was genuine. A gentle knock at the door made Cheyenne turn. Captain Robert Hayes stood in the doorway, dressed in civilian clothes, a simple polo shirt and jeans, holding a massive basket of fresh fruit and expensive chocolates. I hope I'm not interrupting. Hayes smiled warmly. Captain, Cheyenne beamed, standing up and immediately wrapping him in a fierce, heartfelt hug. You could never interrupt. Please come in. Hayes handed the basket to Cheyenne and walked over to the bed, offering his hand to Leo. How are we doing today, Spider-Man? Leo gave him a high five, grinning widely. I'm good. The doctors gave me ice cream for breakfast. Don't get used to it, Cheyenne laughed, wiping a tear of pure joy from her cheek. Hayes turned to Cheyenne, his expression turning serious but gentle. I came to give you an update. Dalen Miller was denied bail this morning. The feds have taken over the case. With the evidence we seized from his home and his phone, he's looking at 20 years minimum. He will never wear a badge again. He will never hurt anyone again. Cheyenne let out a long, slow breath, a heavy weight finally lifting off her chest completely. The system had failed her initially, but one good man had torn that corrupt system down to protect her family. Thank you, Robert, she said softly, her voice thick with gratitude. You saved my son. You saved our lives. No, Cheyenne, Hayes replied, shaking his head, a soft smile touching his lips. You saved my daughter, and you fought like hell for your son. I just did my job. We're even. As the morning sun bathed the room in a warm, golden glow, Cheyenne looked at her smiling son, and then at the captain who had restored her faith in humanity. The nightmare was over. They had walked through the fire, and they had survived. The harrowing journey of Cheyenne and Leo reminds us that true courage often shines brightest in our darkest, most terrifying moments. While systemic prejudice and corruption can create unimaginable nightmares, the unwavering love of a mother and the steadfast integrity of true public servants can bring down even the most arrogant villains. What would you have done if you were in Cheyenne's shoes? Have you ever had to stand up against unfair authority? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, Please hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, real-life drama.